My name is Sophia, and I had just turned 17 when my life took a dramatic turn. Let me paint you a picture of my family. At first glance, we seemed like a decent bunch. My father worked tirelessly, while my mother stayed home. I had a younger sister, Felisa, who was only 12 years old. My father was a senior manager at a store owned by my maternal grandmother's company. My grandmother was a woman of remarkable energy and ambition. Her path to success began with a small chain of stores specializing in laundry mats, but she didn't stop there. Over time, her business expanded to include the production of household cleaning products and laundry detergents. When she decided to retire, she offered my mother the opportunity to take over the company. However, my mother declined. Business acumen was not her strong suit. That's when my father stepped in, but it was from this point on that our family life began to fall apart. I still remember the day everything started to unravel. I was in my room, trying to focus on my homework, when loud shouting erupted from downstairs. My mother's voice boomed like thunder on a clear day. "You're just a failure, John. This is my house, my family's business, and you should be grateful I let you run it." After that, the shouting became almost a daily occurrence. My parents no longer spoke calmly to each other. Every interaction ended in an argument. I tried to distract Felisa by playing games with her or helping her with her homework, but even she, despite her age, began to sense that something was wrong. Our once strong family was slowly but surely falling apart. Then came the day I will never forget. I came home from school and found my father in the living room. A suitcase stood at his feet. My heart sank, and I froze in place. "Dad?" My voice trembled. "What's going on?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with exhaustion and sadness. He walked over and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I can't stay here anymore. This isn't good for any of us." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. What about us? What about me and Felisa? My voice cracked. He looked away, his face showing the pain he was trying to hide. "I love you both, but sometimes love just isn't enough." He kissed my forehead, then turned to Felisa, who stood watching with wide eyes. Kneeling down, he hugged her and said, "Take care of yourself and your big sister, okay, pumpkin?" And then he left. The door closed behind him with a finality that was terrifying. I stood in the living room for what felt like hours, unable to move. An hour later, Mom came home. I told her what had happened. She just nodded, as if she had expected it. "Good riddance," she said indifferently. I couldn't believe my ears. "How can you say that?" I asked. Her eyes, cold and stern, met mine. "Your father cheated on me, Sophia. More than once." I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. From my room, I could hear Mom talking on the phone. She was laughing. Her voice sounded almost happy, something I hadn't heard in a long time. I tried to guess who she was speaking to but didn't dare eavesdrop. It seemed like things couldn't get worse. But life had another surprise in store. One morning at breakfast, Mom announced, "I have news. I'm getting married." I nearly choked on my cereal. "Mom!" "But Dad just left," I exclaimed. She waved me off as if my words didn't matter. "True love comes unexpectedly, Sophia. You'll understand when you're older." A week later, David moved into our house. A tall, imposing man with broad shoulders and neatly combed hair, he made an effort to win everyone over. He played games with Felisa, helped her with her homework. But with me, it seemed like he kept his distance. I felt like a stranger in my own home. After Dad left, Mom had taken over running the company, and she brought David on board. They seemed like the perfect team, always together, discussing business strategies and expansion plans. I tried to focus on my own life, school friends, typical teenage concerns, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense that I was becoming invisible in my own family. This feeling intensified every day until it all came to a head when Mom and David announced at dinner their plans to open a new branch of the company in another city. "We're moving," Mom said enthusiastically, as though this was some grand adventure. My heart stopped. I stared at her, trying to process the news. "But what about me?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mom looked at me, her expression softening, but there wasn't a hint of doubt in her eyes. "This is a wonderful opportunity for the business, and for you too. David and I talked it over and decided it would be best if you stayed here." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. "Stay here? Without you?" I asked, unable to believe my ears. Mom quickly added, "It's just that the new house won't have much space, and you're almost done with school. There's no point in transferring now, right before your exams." Something inside me broke. "So where am I supposed to live? On the street?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia," Mom snapped. "You'll stay with Grandma. She's already agreed." I stood up from the table, holding back tears, and rushed to my room, slamming the door behind me. Hot tears of anger and pain streamed down my cheeks. I couldn't understand when I had become such a burden to my own mother. The following weeks passed in a haze. I helped Felisa pack her things, trying to stay calm for her sake. She cried, not wanting to leave her friends, and I did everything I could to comfort her. "Promise you'll visit us, Sophia," she said, her big brown eyes glistening with tears. "Of course I will," I replied, hugging her tightly. "You won't get rid of me that easily." The day of their departure came far too quickly. I stood on the porch next to Grandma, watching their van pull out of the driveway. Mom hugged me one last time, while David gave an awkward nod. Felisa waved at me from the window until the car disappeared from view. Living with Grandma turned out to be not as bad as I feared. She was cool in her own way, giving me plenty of space when I needed it, but always there with a cup of tea and a listening ear if I wanted to talk. Still, it didn't feel like home. My 18th birthday came and went faster than I expected. I woke up that morning with a strange emptiness, like I should have been excited but felt only longing instead. Mom, of course, called. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Her voice was overly cheerful, almost theatrical. "Sorry we can't be there. Things are so hectic right now. But we'll celebrate when we visit next month, okay?" I knew that promise meant nothing. They hadn't visited once since they left. "Sure, Mom, that sounds great," I said, hiding my disappointment. Grandma must have sensed my mood because she threw me a proper celebration. She let me invite my friends, ordered my favorite food, and even baked a cake herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot everything else. But the next morning, when I came downstairs, Grandma called me into her home office. Her face was serious, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Sit down, Sophia," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to talk." For a moment, I was afraid she was going to kick me out. Where would I go then? But instead, she smiled, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small folder. "Happy birthday, dear. Open it." I unfolded the folder, and my breath caught. Inside were papers, documents that immediately struck me as incredibly important. When I realized what they were, my hands began to shake. Grandma nodded, her eyes gleaming with that same determination I'd always admired in her. "The company is yours now, Sophia," she said firmly. "I see potential in you, my dear. You have a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do great." "But Mom and David, they're running it now," I stammered, struggling to get the words out. Grandma's face hardened slightly, her smile replaced by a resolute expression. They're managing a branch, but the main company, the heart of it all, belongs to you now. I sat there, stunned. I had just turned 18, and suddenly I was the owner of a multimillion-dollar company. It felt like a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. I don't know what to say, I murmured, staring down at the folder in my hands. Grandma reached across the desk and gently squeezed my hand. You don't need to say anything. Just promise me that you'll give it your all. I raised my eyes, meeting her warm but resolute gaze, and nodded. I promise. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, smiling her signature gentle smile. Good. Now, I have one more piece of advice for you, Sophia, and I want you to listen carefully. I leaned in closer, feeling her words sink into me. Call your father. There's more to this story than you know. Talk to him. Maybe even bring him on as an advisor, if you want. But hear him out. Her words echoed in my mind, lingering like a distant refrain. It took me a week to gather my thoughts and summon the courage to call my dad. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, my heart clenched. He looked older than I remembered, tired, but his eyes lit up when he spotted me. We hugged silently, the awkwardness of the first few moments almost unbearable. But as soon as I started talking, everything spilled out. The divorce. Mom's new marriage. Our move. Grandma's gift. Dad listened quietly, his face a mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, regret. When I finished, he took a deep breath. Sophia, there's something you need to know about the divorce, he began. His voice was quiet but firm. He told me everything. How Mom never respected him, how her constant jabs and criticism tore at his self-esteem. How she called him a failure, making him feel worthless. After one particularly awful fight. I got drunk, his voice faltered. And I made the biggest mistake of my life. I cheated on her. I saw his face twist with shame. I regretted it immediately, but your mother, she used it against me. She threatened to take me to court, to take everything we had. She demanded that I leave, give her the house, the business, and you and Felisa. Why didn't you fight back? I asked, feeling my head spin from everything I was hearing. His eyes met mine, filled with sadness and love, and I couldn't help but believe him. Because of you and Felisa. I didn't want you to go through the ugliness of a messy public divorce. I thought it would be easier for you this way. As we talked, I felt the heavy weight I'd been carrying for so long begin to lift. This was my father. The real father I remembered. Before we parted, I took a deep breath and asked, Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company as a consultant? The slow smile that spread across his face was all the answer I needed. The months flew by in a whirlwind of exam preparation and late-night study sessions. Time seemed to speed up. Before I knew it, I was standing on stage, holding my high school diploma. Grandma sat beaming with pride in the audience. Mom and David, of course, were absent. I had learned not to expect much from that part of my family. As summer arrived, I threw myself into preparing for college applications. Grandma supported me every step of the way, and Dad offered advice and encouragement over the phone. I set ambitious goals for myself, and to my surprise, acceptance letters started rolling in. But the biggest shock came in the form of a package from the company. Inside was a letter offering to fund my education entirely. I stared at the letter, barely able to breathe. The words felt both incredible and overwhelming. Grandma hugged me tightly. I knew you could do it, sweetheart, her voice trembled with joy. All those late nights, competitions, your determination, it all paid off. I chose business management as my major. It seemed like the logical choice. After all, I had a company now, and I needed to learn how to run it. The idea still felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. But I was determined to prove to Grandma that she hadn't been wrong about me. To celebrate my college acceptance, Grandma insisted on a modest party for just the two of us. She ordered fancy takeout and bought a bottle of sparkling cider. Grandma would never let me have champagne, even if I were old enough. We had just started dinner when the doorbell rang sharply. Grandma frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." "I'll get it," I said, placing my fork on the edge of my plate. When I opened the door, my heart sank. Mom and David stood there, looking irritated and impatient. Before I could say anything, they pushed past me into the house. "We need to talk about the company," Mom began immediately, skipping any greeting or pleasantries. I stood there, stunned, watching as she launched into a tirade without even glancing at me. She didn't ask how I was, didn't mention my college acceptance, didn't inquire about my achievements, as if I didn't exist. "Why can't we access the main accounts?" Mom demanded. "Why are you blocking the transfer of funds to the subsidiary?" Grandma sat at the table, her eyes narrowing, a mix of irritation and resolve etched on her face. "Because that's no longer your decision, Baze," she replied calmly, her voice steady and unyielding. "The company belongs to Sophia now. She will decide its future and manage its finances." A heavy silence filled the room. Grandma's words hung in the air like a thick curtain, separating one reality from another. I watched as Mom's expression shifted, first shock, then anger, and finally calculation. Her tone suddenly softened, and she took a step toward me, her voice sickly sweet. "Sophia, sweetheart. I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us?" I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change. Mom extended her hand as if to touch mine, but I instinctively stepped back. "We have such a beautiful house," she continued, her smile stretching tight like a mask. "You'll have your own room. We'll get you a new computer for school and work. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" "No, Mom," I said evenly, striving to stay calm. "I'm happy here. I have friends, my school, and Grandma. She needs me." Mom's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly composed herself, her voice growing softer though tension simmered beneath the surface. "Well, if that's the case, why don't we move back here? We could live in our old house, like we used to. Wouldn't that be nice?" "It's not about the house, Mom," I shook my head, exhaustion creeping into my voice. "It's everything." I noticed her eyes fill with barely suppressed anger. Her face tightened, and before she could speak again, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Mom, why did you and Dad really get divorced?" Her body stiffened, as if caught off guard. For a moment, she seemed uncertain but quickly regained her composure. "I've told you before, Sophia. Your father cheated on me multiple times. I got tired of it. He left us for his mistress and didn't even pay child support." "That's not true," I said firmly. "Dad told me everything. He admitted it happened only once, and he regretted it immediately. He said you constantly belittled him, treated him like he didn't matter. He didn't leave us, Mom. You forced him out." Her eyes flashed with anger, but I continued, feeling an odd sense of freedom wash over me. "And now he pays for everything. Consistently." Mom took a step back, her face pale, and David, who had been silent the entire time, cast a quick glance in her direction. Mom's face twisted with fury. "How dare you, you ungrateful little child! You have no right to interfere in my personal life." Her voice shook with rage, and her eyes blazed. "Everything here belongs to me, and I decide who lives where." Grandma, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm, brimming with the quiet strength I had always felt behind her gentle demeanor. "That's enough, Baze," she said, looking Mom straight in the eye. "You seem to have forgotten a few key facts. This house, the company, they belong to me, not you." Mom opened her mouth to retort, but Grandma raised her hand, stopping her. "I handed the company over to Sophia because I trust her judgment far more than yours. And now, I think it's time for you to leave." A mix of emotions churned within me: anger, relief, and a deep sadness. Grandma firmly escorted Mom and David to the door and then closed it behind them. The click of the lock sounded final, like the closing chapter of a book in my life. As silence filled the house, I realized something inside me had shifted. I had lost the last illusions I held about my mother but gained clarity about my path forward. I wasn't alone. What now? I asked quietly, my voice trembling with the weight of emotions. Grandma placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes radiating warmth and support. "Now," she said with a gentle smile, "we go back to celebrating your college acceptance. And tomorrow, we start planning your future, your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you." The next morning, after that tumultuous evening, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously crept down the stairs. To my surprise, I saw Dad sitting in the living room, deep in conversation with Grandma. I hesitated before approaching and sat down beside them. Grandma turned to me, her face serious but without a hint of judgment in her eyes. "I've been thinking about Felisa," she said. "Your mom, well, I'm not sure she's in a position to take care of her right now." I held my breath, feeling a glimmer of hope seep into my soul. "I suggested to your father that he seek custody of Felisa," Grandma added. I looked at Dad. His face reflected a mix of nervousness and determination. He ran a hand through his hair as if trying to collect his thoughts, and finally said, "Yes, I'm going to do it. It won't be easy, but Felisa deserves better than what she has now." I couldn't hold back and threw my arms around him. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, tears of joy streaming down my cheeks. When we pulled away, Grandma cleared her throat. "There's something else you need to know," she said. "I hired a private investigator to look into your mother and David." Her words hung in the air, leaving behind a strange sense of foreboding. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. I started college and immersed myself in my studies. Dad visited regularly, and our relationship began to heal. I felt a deep joy in having him back in my life. About 3 weeks after that morning conversation, Grandma called us both into her study. Her face was grim as she began to speak. "The investigator's report came in," she said without preamble. Dad and I waited silently for her to continue. "It's worse than we thought." Grandma laid out the facts, each one hitting like a punch to the gut. Mom had been unfaithful to Dad long before the divorce, and her affair with David had started while she and Dad were still married. The investigator uncovered hotel receipts and records of expensive gifts. It painted a grim picture. But the most horrifying revelation came last. Grandma took a deep breath before saying, "David is a con artist. He was doing this long before he met your mother. He seduces wealthy women, convinces them to transfer assets into his name, and then disappears with their money." I felt sick to my stomach at what I heard. "That's why they were in such a hurry to transfer the company's assets," I said, my voice trembling. Grandma nodded, her face tense. "Yes. He was likely planning to steal it all and vanish." We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Grandma broke the quiet. "We need to tell your mother the truth. She needs to know who she's involved with." A meeting was arranged for the next day. Mom arrived at Grandma's house looking irritated and impatient. Her expression quickly turned to surprise when she saw Dad. What followed was perhaps the most painful conversation I had ever been part of. Grandma laid everything out, the evidence of Mom's affair with David, his fraudulent schemes, and his plans to steal from the company. I watched Mom's face closely, hoping to see some sign of remorse or understanding. Instead, all I saw was denial. "This is ridiculous," Mom muttered, her voice trembling with anger. "David loves me. He would never do that. You're all just jealous of our happiness." Dad tried to reason with her. "Baze, please, look at the evidence. Think about Felisa. Is this the kind of man you want around our daughter?" But Mom wasn't listening. She sprang to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "I don't have to listen to this. David is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all just trying to ruin my life." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard that I flinched. We sat in stunned silence. I realized this was only the beginning. This fight was going to be long and difficult. But when I looked at Grandma and Dad, I knew I wouldn't face it alone. The next few months were filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil. Dad, supported by Grandma and her legal expertise, filed for custody of Felisa. I tried to focus on my studies, but the drama unfolding around us made it nearly impossible. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I insisted on being there. The proceedings dragged on for hours. Mom's lawyer tried to paint Dad as an absent parent, but our attorney was prepared. He presented evidence that Dad had consistently paid child support, maintained regular contact with me and Felisa, and provided a stable environment for her. The climax came when the private investigator's report was introduced, exposing David's history of fraud and his plans to embezzle company funds. I couldn't take my eyes off Mom's face. At first, she looked shocked, then furious, and finally, she fainted. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge announced the decision to grant Dad full custody of Felisa, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief that Felisa was now safe. Sadness that it had come to this. We walked out of the courthouse, Dad carrying Felisa in his arms while I walked beside them. Mom stopped us on the steps, her eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, clenching her fists. Grandma stepped forward, positioning herself between us. "No, Baze. It is over. It's time for you to go home." Her voice was cold but resolute. Mom tried to argue, but Grandma didn't back down. Seething with anger, Mom stormed away. Later, we discovered another twist. The court had ordered Mom to pay child support to Dad for Felisa. It was almost unbelievable. Mom, who always thought all resources should flow to her, now had to give instead. I stood beside Dad and Grandma, feeling something inside me slowly click back into place. We had made it through the day, and I knew there were more challenges ahead. But at that moment, I felt the strength of my family, and it gave me the courage to move forward. I threw myself into my studies and learning about the company, hoping to distance myself from the ongoing drama. Still, I couldn't ignore the satisfaction I felt upon hearing that David had left Mom, running off with another woman and a significant portion of her personal savings. It was a cool autumn evening. I was sitting at my desk in Grandma's house, surrounded by textbooks and company reports, when the phone rang. Dad's voice on the other end was tense, filled with emotions he was trying to mask. "Your mother came to see me today," he began. I froze, my heart beating faster. "She said she wants to reconcile. That she made a mistake and wants us to be a family again." His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. A part of me, a small, childlike part, wanted him to say yes. Wanted to bring back the family we once had. But I knew too much now. We had all been through too much. "And what did you say?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. "I told her no," he said firmly. I told her that ship sailed a long time ago. I won't put you or Felisa through that again. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. You deserve better, Dad. We all do, I said. There was a pause on the other end, and when Dad spoke again, I could hear the smile in his voice. When did you get so wise, Sophia? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. I learned from the best. When I hung up, my eyes wandered around the room. Textbooks lay open on the desk, a neat stack of company reports beside them. On the bulletin board were photos of me with Dad, Felisa, and Grandma. They were all smiling, and those smiles filled me with a warm sense of certainty. This wasn't the life I had imagined a year ago. It was far from perfect. But it was real, and it was mine. I thought about Mom, how her schemes and manipulations had led her to isolation. A pang of pity quickly gave way to a sense of justice. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Meanwhile, I had my family. I had a company to run. And I had a future full of possibilities. Time flew by. College and managing the company left little room for reflection. Lectures, late-night study sessions, financial reports, the days blurred together in a constant stream of activity. But weekends became sacred. Every Friday, I packed my things and headed to Dad's house to spend time with him and Felisa. Sophia. Felisa squealed, hugging me tightly as soon as I walked through the door. Now 10 years old, she had grown into an awkwardly lanky girl with boundless energy. Dad would usually emerge from the kitchen, wearing an apron and smiling. Dinner's almost ready. Those weekends became my anchor. We ate together, with Felisa chattering about school while Dad and I discussed the company. After Felisa went to bed, Dad and I often stayed up late, going over strategies and plans. Sundays were reserved for visiting Grandma. She would cook something delicious, filling the house with the aroma of roast chicken and apple pie. After lunch, we would sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. I always knew you had it in you, Sophia, Grandma would say, squeezing my hand. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. True to his word, Dad continued to manage the company while teaching me everything he knew. I'll hand over the reins when you're ready, he said one evening. I hugged him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, Dad. For everything. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, tough decisions to make, and questions to answer. But when I looked at my little family, Dad, Felisa, Grandma, I knew we could handle anything. Together, we could overcome it all.